Welcome to the Gentleman's Guide to Gaming, Curseborn and Stephen King. I don't believe there was anyone on the Curseborn team that would so closely identify their work's inspirations with Stephen King as I did. And that isn't supposed to be me bragging. Everyone brought their own inspirations to Curseborn. Different people engage with different media in different ways. For instance, I know Dixie, one of my colleagues, is strongly influenced by Mike Flanagan, as an example. We can see all kinds of inspirations listed in the inspirational media in the book. My major takeaways were Stephen King, David Lynch, to a degree Mike Flanagan, but mainly King and Lynch. And in the case of Stephen King, there is a strong reason for why. I can look at a great many of Stephen King's works, whether they delve wholly into the supernatural or whether they deal with something far more mundane but also terrifying, and easily place it in the world of Curseborn. So whenever I was writing Curseborn or running Curseborn, I could feel Stephen King's clammy, well-worn, writerly hands on my shoulders in a way that I think was supposed to comfort and reassure, but of course deeply terrified me, as having Stephen King lurking behind you probably would. But, you know, I still appreciated his presence, even if it was something out of Creepshow. But nevertheless, Stephen King was a massive influence for me and my work on Curseborn, because I could look at any number of his works and say, this is a Curseborn game waiting to happen. Why am I making this video? Well, it is simply that one of you fine folks who watches this channel with some religiosity decided that they wanted to know, how would I turn a Stephen King novel into a Curseborn game? And that is something I have bounced around a lot since someone asked me, because I've mentioned Stephen King a few times in relation to Curseborn, and there's lots of novels I could apply that Curseborn framework to. I mean, hell, you could go for something as more rooted in reality as Billy Summers, which still has moments of, I guess, supernaturalism. There's a moment with the Overlook Hotel in that novel, as I recall, all the way through to something as out there as Fairy Tale. So there you go, that's two more of his recent novels. I think a lot of the time when people think of King, they think of what you might regard as classic period. I don't know that I'd agree. I think he's been so prolific over the time, he has been consistently classic. You know, there are obviously some stories are better than others. It's subjective, but most people are going to look at the ones that had TV movies made of them, because Stephen King was huge at a time when VHS rentals were huge. I don't know that there's a massive correlation here, but I remember distinctly the double VHS box sets of The Stand, of Salem's Lot, of It, of his version of The Shining, and so on. And I recall, in fact, and this is why I'm going to talk a bit about It in particular, that the very first Stephen King novel I read was It. And the reason I did that was because my sister, who was older than me, I was probably about 8 or 9, rented It from our local shop, the video, and at a too young age I saw Tim Curry as Pennywise and ended up with nightmares. But it also sparked off a real interest in horror. I was scared, but I was interested, I was intrigued, I wanted to see more of this. And so yeah, I got on a Stephen King kick. Hell, before that TV movie, there were trailers for all the other Stephen King TV movies. There was bits of The Stand, there were bits of maybe even The Langoliers and others of varying quality, but as a child they were all hellishly captivating. And I discovered that my dad had a copy of It, the novel. Now, when I was about 11 or 12, I read it. And I know what you might be thinking. If you're familiar with the written version of It, you will know there are some differences between that and what was ever put on TV or the later movie of It, or movies of It. And you're correct. But as an 11 or 12-year-old, when I first read It, I was so captivated by it. I was, again, horrified, but I loved how deep this author got into his world and how crooked that world felt, how it was being presented, how corrupt an entity like Pennywise was making the entire town of Derry and its inhabitants. That really resonated with me in a way that, believe me, I read other horror as well. I was reading my Goosebumps and my Point horrors and my James Herberts as well, but Stephen King's It was a massive watershed moment for me. And so this is what we'll focus on. And actually, you know what? Brief sidebar. I know that these days there's a certain specific segment of It that a lot of viewers, readers look askance at and say, that doesn't really hold up. And it's the part where before the juvenile characters in It confront Pennywise, they all have sex in the underground. And I remember when I first read that, I didn't find it titillating, but it made complete sense to me. Now, why did it make complete sense? And I'm not speaking on a moral or ethical ground, because, in that regard, no, what's going on here is clearly depraved, but so is everything else that is around. And I don't think it reflects badly on the author. There are some verbiage choices that I would have probably made differently, but I'm not Stephen King, and he's earned a lot more than me. So it clearly didn't do too much damage to his career. But the idea, when I was 11 or 12, I was very much split between two polar opposites of interest. Sex, because I was a young teen. I was coming into my teenage years, puberty, sex was everywhere, and I wanted to learn about it. At the very least, I was curious about it. And violence, because violence in media, it was cool. Action movies, explosions, death, murders, horror movies. That didn't mean I was some serial killer waiting to happen. That's not happened yet. But the idea that the violent atmosphere, the danger, could result in sex it made sense to me that these children, these teens who were around the same age as I was when I was reading it, would equate a near-death experience. We might all die tomorrow, therefore let's lose our virginity as a almost mutual offering that will also bond us forever. It makes sense in a juvenile kind of way. It's almost the kind of thing that anyone up to the age of 21 is probably going to be diving into, in the sense of, we might die tomorrow, so let's do it. You see it in so much media, and I think the reason a lot of people bounce off of it in it is the age of the characters and some of the verbiage that's used. But I didn't find it at all shocking, I suppose, and now that makes it very difficult for me from adulthood to look back on it in retrospect as shocking. Yeah, morally vacuous, but logically, in that instance, it makes a certain kind of sense. It's desperation. That isn't what I would put in my Curseborn game based on it. What I would put in my Curseborn game based on it is an outsider threat. And the outsider is another thing we will get onto in a minute. If you're more familiar with some of Stephen King's later works, The Outsider is another very good one that's very Curseborn-y, but let's look at it right now. So the idea of an extraplanar being that is not only lurking beneath a town, but has basically infested the town with its negativity, is something I find so exquisitely Curseborn. And it doesn't even have to be the setting that you tend to use for your Curseborn games. It doesn't have to be their town. It can indeed be a town they are visiting. I mentioned in my previous Curseborn video the plot hook of a character goes missing and that inspires them to investigate. I think you can still use that, but have that character go missing from somewhere that they don't come from. Introduce them to an alien environment, in other words, a foreign town, a town one state over, where they haven't been before, where things are just amiss. The uncanny, unsettling, Royston Vasey feel of entering a place where people look at you weirdly because you're not from around here, where you just can't get served without demanding it because you're not a local. where you choose the wrong parking space and offend someone completely inadvertently, where you ask the wrong question and are hastened out of the store, where you go to visit the house of the person who's gone missing, you find out that it's been empty for months, and yet you last heard from him a week ago. So where is he? I think the way Derry, the town in It, is presented is perfect for that. And you can very easily use Derry as the setting of a Curseborn game, because the way people act in Derry, especially when they reach adulthood, is a form of ignorant abuse. You have the ignorance, the people who will just constantly turn the other way and even forget about the horrors that are going on in their town. People being brutally murdered, children being ripped apart next to a storm drain, and no one ever really coming to a conclusion as to how or why or who is behind it. The events that occur with kids, like, hell, even the dreadful character of Patrick Hockstetter, who is basically taken away and consumed by Pennywise. You don't ever hear about Hockstetter's parents, putting out a report to report him missing. They're putting his face on milk cartons or anything like that. In Derry, that kind of thing is very swiftly forgotten. And it becomes more intimate, the abuse side of things, when you start examining the family setups, when you start seeing how parents are treating their children, when you start seeing how spouses are treating their partners. It's a really curse-laden town. And what that should make your accursed feel when they arrive there is the curses here are out of control. Can we find out who is responsible for this? Which families, in Curseborn parlance, are in charge here? How do we, how do we put a cap on this that's spilling out and infecting the entire neighborhood, beyond the neighborhood, the entire environment? And maybe indeed they find some accursed who are aware. And maybe the first accursed they meet, and this isn't something that's really explored in It until the, I guess, latter half of it, where It is making deals with certain corrupt grown-ups, the sort of Henry Bowerses, that maybe they meet someone who propitiates, who sacrifices, who pays tribute to this Pennywise-like entity, who, in order to keep the status quo, to maintain the stranglehold of power, is prepared to lose the occasional child every now and then, is prepared to suffer various abuses in their town. As long as I can remain mayor, the town can suffer. And so the first accursed they meet look just as bent out of shape as the rest of Derry. I think that is something you can explore that can make the place seem entirely unseemly. Especially if the person who's gone missing is, let's say, a member of your accursed family, and maybe you're saying, look, this person is as important as you. They bear the same curses as you. They bear the same ability. They bear the same lineage as you. Why don't you know where they are? All I heard is they went wandering in the town outskirts recently. They kept revisiting the old pumping station and never told anyone why, but they haven't emerged. But I suppose if you're interested, you're free to have a look as well, says our character, who is, of course, deeply corrupt. Now, from there, of course, I think before they delve deeply into the pumping station and encounter Pennywise in clown form, they should of course hear about this clown that is going around. Pennywise isn't only a clown, of course. Pennywise is only a clown to some people. Pennywise is in the form that people will find most terrifying. So maybe the idea of nightmares that are coming to life across Derry is something that will appeal to them, especially if we have a poltergeist in our crew of Accursed, given that they truck in fear most heavily. So yeah, you find out about this entity that is appearing and traumatizing people and threatening them, and occasionally there are reports even of it taking people away. And it seems to have a different face every single time. and that will give them a certain idea of what they're up against, something that is powerful enough to change form and scale, essentially. It can be a giant, it can be a miniature, it can be a leprechaun, it can be a living puppet, it can be a mummy, a Frankenstein's monster, zombie, whatever we like, or, of course, clown. And we will get to the point where they do eventually want to confront Pennywise, but the characters shouldn't rush into it foolhardily. If they go in naive or unprepared, they're going to find themselves hopelessly outmatched, because I would see Pennywise through the lens of Curseborn as an archon, as a fae, as something deeply powerful and alien. And their base spells are not going to have any effect on it. And they can't just do the close their eyes and say, I don't believe in you, because they know full well that Pennywise exists. Pennywise is beaten by people overcoming their fear. The accursed are made up of fears. They know that they are carrying curses around like a disease, and wherever they go, they are potentially spreading it. So they can't beat Pennywise in the same way that the kids can, but maybe they can find kids that can beat Pennywise on their behalf. And so now we would develop our Curseborn game to be less about beating up a giant monster, which isn't all that fun, and instead finding juveniles, finding teens, finding kids whose minds are still open to the idea of Pennywise's existence. But if they are bolstered well enough, if they are heartened by our accursed, maybe they can drive Pennywise back. But remember, driving Pennywise back isn't destroying Pennywise. The It story has two major encounters with it himself or itself, herself, I believe, because she lays eggs. And the first time it puts it in hibernation, but it then eventually returns. So you would then progress, maybe have the first encounter with it go surprisingly well, but for some reason that aura, that stain on Derry doesn't go away. Maybe the abuse is stopped, but the ignorance remains. People will still refuse to acknowledge the horrors that they have witnessed and heard about, and they just want to move on with their life. There's nothing to be gained by talking about it all. So perhaps for part 2, because it's always good to come back to a similar plot, maybe one of those kids they helped out a few months ago, a couple of years ago, gets on the phone to them for the first time in a long time. It's back. Return to Derry. Okay, now our character is going to be more powerful because they will have been on a few adventures since then. Maybe now is the time for the big boss battle. Maybe this is a good chance to make the sewers a liminality. You'll be aware of the deadlights that Pennywise essentially projects and hypnotizes, basically kills your soul and drags you toward it. This can basically be a window into a battleground, one of our outside areas in zones in Curseborn, and you have to enter it. Maybe you have to succumb to Pennywise's deadlight in order to face it in its truest form. And then, yes, it could be a horrendous battle, but I always suggest that if you're going to have a battle, there needs to be more stakes than just killing the monster. It needs to have some of its prey captive, and you need to rescue it. You need to vary the environment, so it cannot just be on a simple plane in a white room. There needs to be ledges, there needs to be cover, there needs to be things that need sacrificing, choices you need to make that can make the situation better or worse. Often better at the expense of something you have to give up, or better at the expense of an innocent who might die so that you can do what you're trying to do. Alternatively, worse, so that your companions can do something better than you would have been able to. That kind of thing. It's always fun to play with that kind of thing. Now, finally, you take down Pennywise, and maybe you free Derry from the blight that is overcoming it. And I mentioned The Outsider earlier because it's another very good Stephen King work, and I'm not just going to go through every single Stephen King novel, because there are a lot, and so many of them work very well with the Curseborn framework. But The Outsider is a novel where there is I'm not going to ruin it because it's a relatively recent one, and I very much recommend it. But there is a case where there is a terrible, terrible murder of a child that points in all evidence to one suspect. Fingerprints, DNA, he was seen near the scene of the crime, and, even spoke to people. There are witnesses, not to the crime itself, but to the man emerging from the woods covered in blood, and so on. Everything points to this one person. But then it transpires that he has a cast iron alibi. He is caught on camera somewhere else at the same time. So the question is he actually the killer? Does he have a doppelganger? Can he split himself in two? What is the outsider? And the outsider, without, again, spoiling anything, is the killer in this story. Not something that is from around here, something that comes from someplace else. Maybe even the same place as a creature like Pennywise. Again, I won't spoil it, but I would say the outsider, and the reason I didn't focus on the outsider is because it is less known, and I recommend people read it, because it's a great murder mystery. But the ideas within it are so perfectly Curseborn. So yeah, is it easy to turn a Stephen King novel into a Curseborn plot? Absolutely. And you can use the investigative elements of novels like it to actually investigate the various deaths, so you don't immediately fall upon Pennywise and the pumping station and all that. You can basically look into Georgie Denborough, and you can look into Eddie Corker and the mines going. I'm remembering all the names now. You can look into all the characters that have died in all these horrendous ways. So you've got your CSI element of Stephen King, but also from a roleplay perspective, that gives you investigations to look into. So you've got your social, interacting with the people of Derry. You've got your investigation, your crime scenes, and seeing where the evidence leads. You have your physical. There's going to be people in Derry who want to stop you doing from what you're doing, your Henry Bowers types, and also Pennywise itself. So, is it possible to turn a Stephen King novel into a Curseborn plot? Absolutely yes, and I recommend you do so. If you're struggling for an idea, look to Stephen King, because I could reel off 10 in quick succession plots from Stephen King novels that you could easily turn into a game of Curseborn to varying degrees of supernaturality. And shall I do it right now? Hell, let's go ahead. Let's go for Needful Things. Needful Things is the most obvious link from Curseborn to Stephen King. Some kind of accursed fey creature comes to town and ruins it. It, we've already covered. The Shining, excellent haunted hotel that is mainly haunted by the psychoses of the people within it, but combined with a genuine haunting, almost demonic presence. The hotel itself is evil. It is the perfect liminal space, the Overlook Hotel. And following on from that, Dr. Sleep. Dr. Sleep is a brilliant story, absolutely amazing story, and the movie by Mike Flanagan is great too, very underrated in my view, because it actually shows what can happen when accursed get out of control. Your antagonists, your Circle and the Knot, your Knot characters who are basically drinking the Shining out of people, are hungry, essentially. They are Vorari in Curseborn, utterly out of control and consuming everything they can for as much power as they like, and they need to be stopped. The Outsider, I mentioned as well. That's a great murder mystery, so that's less hugely supernatural in the It way and more grisly murder mystery. So that's our first 5. Now let's look at 11/22/63. Now, that is a Curseborn game, Stephen King novel that will deal with epochs, the ability to travel back to a specific fixed point in time, maybe from which you can change your own future. But remember, every single time you do, there's going to be certain ripple effects, and time is obdurate. It does not like to be changed. I will actually pare things down really well now to one of the simplest of novels, which is Christine. You have a haunted car. A car, well, it's not even necessarily haunted. It is a car that develops its own murderous personality, maybe because it's being abused by its owners, maybe because it just doesn't like humans. And I think Christine is just a wonderful one-shot plot for a game of Curseborn where people are dying in automobile accidents or being killed within their own car in horrible ways. What's going on? Well, the car is cursed. And I will extend that, indeed, to one of his other older works, Cujo. Because Cujo, also set in Castle Rock, along with Needful Things, is a story about a beast that is on the loose. It is a wild dog, but it is more than a wild dog. There is all kinds of Castle Rock's ill feelings wrapped up in this one animal, and it is causing merry mayhem, and the accursed are the only people who can deal with it. Now, Cujo and Christine are very simple, so let's go to something a little more involved. If we go for Fairy Tale, indeed, Fairy Tale is a story where a character basically discovers a gateway to a fairy realm. I mean, you might think that's more Changeling the Lost than Curseborn, but we have that kind of thing in Curseborn too. You can access your interstitial realms, your shattered spaces, your battlegrounds through various gateways, portals, weakenings in the fabric of reality and understanding. And the world that is presented in Fairy Tale, the fairy realm, is so alien and weird and dangerous and threatening. I absolutely love it. It is a brilliant novel to look into if you're going to, or to read, if you want to explore what these alien realms in the outside could be like. So finally, number 10, and there are so many different options, so many, and I'm not going to go for one of them huge ones. I mean, Salem's Lot, there is a very recent version of Salem's Lot on Netflix, I believe, or The Stand. I'm certainly not going to go for the Tommy Knockers, sorry. I think for my last one, I am going to... I think I'm going to go for something a little off the wall here. Let's go for Billy Summers. I wasn't going to bring Billy Summers into it because that is a novel that is almost entirely grounded. It is the story of a hitman who is pretty quickly betrayed by the person who hires him, and basically his need to escape his past and everything that takes place in the events of the story. I won't ruin it again because it's a relatively recent one. Now, how does it tie into Curseborn? Because Billy Summers is such a perfect Zed character. Our Zeds are our dead who seek finality. They seek the conclusion of all things. They want to bring the long-lived, the people who have lived longer than they should, to a natural truncation. And Billy Summers is a really good inspiration for a Zed character. Could you play the plot of Billy Summers out as a Curseborn game? I think so. I mentioned in my previous video, I like to have each game that I run spotlight on a different player character and then move on to another protagonist, so everyone gets a focus. I think this is a great opportunity for a Zed to attempt to perform a hit. It goes wrong. Now, the family that hired him wants him dead, so that keeps into the political intrigue of Curseborn. And this Zed is going to need to ask the rest of his crew, our other player characters, for help in tying up some loose ends, whether it's murdering the person who we're trying to hit, or whether it is trying to get the family that's hounding him off of his back. And you can interact. Billy Summers meets some very interesting characters on his path through the story, who can be a young woman who is just coming into her state of being as an accursed. The character in Billy Summers would probably make an excellent primal, I think. And a mentor character as well out in the woods, which is where the Overlook Hotel enters Billy Summers as well. So you could have friendly accursed in that as well. It's not the most obvious link. There are some Stephen King novels I would go for that are more... There are clearer. The Langoliers we've already mentioned, but I didn't put in my top 10, is a wonderful epoch-style novel where you get caught in a space in time. But this is nearly 30 minutes, so I need to shut my mouth and do some other work. Anyway, if you're a fan of Stephen King like I am, and you like Curseborn, do try running some of the elements of his plots in your games. I think you will enjoy it, and I think that his work is eminently suitable for the purpose. Do back Curseborn. It's currently on Kickstarter, and it is doing very, very well. It can even do even better. Thank you so much for watching, and speak to you again soon.